goes home knowing that Raila Odinga has won or Kenyatta has won, or if Kavemba runs for president, Kavemba has won. But at this stage, IBC is held hostage. IBC is held captive. Those commissioners do not represent the cumulative interest of the nation Kenya. They represent the interest of cartels. And when Raila Odinga says, wait a minute, for us to be able to run a free, fair, and credible election, we need to have a new administration at place. And he's not calling for a Nusu Mkate government. He has said times above number, he is no longer interested in Nusu Mkate administration. President Kenyatta has indicated times above number that he's not interested in Nusu Mkate. And the ideal scenario is, we have the Jubilee MPs as well as the NASA MPs going back to the National Assembly and reviewing critical aspects of our constitution, so that we have a caretaker administration. It could be a caretaker administration, it could be interim, because they say a rose by any other name smells as nice. But we have an administration that is not headed by Raila Odinga, that is not headed by President Kenyatta, that is headed by a third party, whose principal mandate is to deliver a free, fair, and credible election in the next 6 months. Believe you me, Yusuf, if we do not have that, anybody who wins this election, assuming that the Supreme Court says, let's go for another election, yes, then Raila decides to participate, so you have Raila and Kenyatta. It doesn't matter who wins. People will not have faith in the outcome. Right now, there are so many people, especially around Lake Victoria, who are complaining about the attacks from Uganda by M7. They're saying, we don't feel like we are part and parcel of Kenya. So there's a lot of mischief. I mean, if you go to the election which was conducted a few days ago, there were 2 million voters who came in through the manual system. They came and voted in manually. So when you speak to analysts, they say, wait a minute, there's a probability that there was a rigging. You recall a few days to the election, there were sections of Kenya which experienced violence. So a number of constituencies did not get to vote. So people are saying, Article 138(2) of our Kenyan constitution says that for a presidential election to be valid, it must be held in every constituency. So those are some of the issues that you need a caretaker administration to sanitize. And maybe in the interest of clarity, in the matter of the Supreme Court, NASA is a respondent in both the issue of Muhuri as well as Njonjo Mue.
Well, of course, we expect that to play out at the Supreme Court without necessarily going into the merits of the case.
Exactly. That's what I wanted to say. That the issues he's bringing out are what we are waiting for a determination from the
Let's go back to the interim government. What do you understand from that, and why? You've seen Jubilee legislators speaking, their leaders speaking, saying that, what Raila and by extension Nasser and NRM now are calling for is some sort of a Nusu Mkate. So where's the relationship between the two? Because according to Dismas, these are two very different things.
Now, first, as a constitutionalist, I am one person who believes in constitutionalism. It's important that we base our arguments on the Constitution, because that's the only way to be logical about what we are saying. And Article 3 of the Constitution says that every person has an obligation to respect, uphold, and defend the Constitution. So it's not a favor. It's that the Constitution itself calls for us to do that. So, and NASA has been very clear that whenever they're exercising their rights, they are always very clear on what article of the Constitution they're invoking. I'm very much interested in seeing what article of the Constitution they're invoking in asking for an interim government. I want to read you what Article 3 again says about government, because there are things that are very, very clear. That any attempt to establish any other government, any attempt to establish government outside what is stipulated in this Constitution is unlawful. So what is it that we will be relying on to establish whatever they are calling an interim government?
Is NASA acting unconstitutional?
Because the question is, the Constitution is very clear on how governments are established.
Yes.
And we all have a duty to defend this Constitution. So the question then is, what is going to be the basis for the establishment of a government that is not clearly stipulated in the Constitution? That is not even, the Constitution didn't even envisage such a government. And the Constitution itself tells us that any attempt to establish government outside what is provided for in the Constitution is unlawful. It is that express. So what is going to be their basis for establishing any other form of government other than what is envisaged in our Constitution?
Now, Yusuf, it's important to know that NASA and Jubilee, all of them, the party leaders have indicated they respect the Kenyan Constitution. By suggesting that you do things which are not in the Constitution today is not illegal. Because for you to effect it, then you need to go through the National Assembly and the Senate. Let's use a good example, 2007. There was no provision that you would have President Kibaki in office with Raila Odinga as a prime minister. But when the fella from the UN came with Kofi Annan, they said, this is the only way we can get Kenya going as a stable nation. So we cited the National Accord, which created that provision. So there's nothing today which stops NASA and Jubilee.
Which led to the amendment of the Constitution.
Yeah, there's nothing which stops them today seeing that there's a crisis in Kenya. And let's run away from these fallacies, that we can accept and move on, that we can bury our hands in the sand and break into understand.
If you can just lean back a little bit because you're blocking me from Dismas.
Sorry.
Anyway, Dismas, you'll continue with your discussion shortly, but for now, let me take you straight to the press conference by the NAS Secretary General, Wilson Sossion. Let's listen in to what he has to say.
Also elect our leaders through democratic process via the delegates. And we've exercised a lot of internal democracy. We value inclusivity as a union, and that is why if you look at the structure of our leadership, inclusivity is #1 priority, as I shall outline. For the last few days, there have been a lot of debates that certain leaders have been kicked out. We don't kick out anybody. We've got organized transition of leadership in the union, and all that is casted in the constitution of the Kenya National Union of Teachers. And I would like to allay the fears that there is a split in the union. There is no split. In fact, there is a lot of constitutional order. And I invite the Kenyan public to watch Kenya National Union of Teachers between now and mid of December. The manner in which the teachers conduct their businesses. The 60th Annual Delegates Conference shall be held in Mombasa between the dates of 13th, 14th, 15th of December. We shall be celebrating the 60th anniversary of KNUT, and it's going to be a colorful event, the most successful event. And why we took it to Mombasa is because the outgoing national chairman shall be bid farewell by the delegates on that particular day. And this decision was taken 1 year ago. We shall also be celebrating 50 years of Teacher Service Commission, Golden Jubilee. And you remember too well that the Teacher Service Commission exists through the struggle of teachers of this country, that it was formed in 1967 through 2 strikes by teachers. And so its Golden Jubilee is a major milestone for the teachers of this country and the teaching profession. So those are 2 activities that we'll have in the ADC. And prior to that, we shall have a National Executive Council retreat this week in Mombasa from Tuesday to Friday. That will be dealing with the preparations for the Annual Delegates Conference and looking at the business, the reports and documents for the 60th Annual Delegates Conference. And so, if there are issues that need to be thrashed, they will be discussed by the NEC in the course of this week. And as an office, my office, the Office of the Secretary General, has done all that is necessary to ensure that we are prepared for the ADC. The delegates are already selected and appointed and are prepared for the ADC in Mombasa. And the agenda of the ADC, as per the Constitution, is prepared by the Secretary General, and that we've done. And we want our delegates to critically focus on very many issues that we'll be dealing with. The progress of implementation of the collective bargaining agreement is a key issue. It's very dear to teachers. And we are more focused in reducing the CBA cycles to 2 years to conform with the international labor standards. And we are happy with the Teacher Service Commission in terms of industrial relations engagement. It's living up to its task at the moment. And so we would like to expand our commitment to the implementation of the CBA by focusing on the reduction of the period and ensuring that there is consistent, successful negotiation of CBS in future. Promotion of teachers is a key issue, both the common cadre and also those who have attained new and higher qualifications, and we are engaging with the Teacher Service Commission on this, and therefore the delegates will have an opportunity to discuss this. Other aspects, new teacher management aspects, the TPAD appraisal systems, the performance contracting, is it working? Those are key questions that teachers, yes, and is it working? The delocalization of teachers and head teachers, is it working? These are open issues that we are engaging with TSC, and we will put our recommendations before the delegates for further discussion. The rolling out of the free secondary education and other reforms in the education sector, these are key issues that we'll need to discuss. Employment of more teachers to match the anticipated enrollment, and would like to remind the public and Kenyans that there cannot be delivery of free education, and nobody should talk about free education when there is acute shortage of teachers. Education begins with a teacher. A school is a school first when there is a presence of a teacher. Then we can talk about classrooms, laboratories, and other teaching and learning tools. And so anybody talking about free education of good quality in this country must think about the teacher. So employment of teachers will be a key matter that the delegates shall be able to discuss.
Well, that is not Secretary General Wilson Sossion addressing the press there. Of course, he also doubles up as a nominated member of Parliament. He's allaying fears that there is a split within the teachers' union, even at a time when it seems there is some politics brewing within the Kenya National Union of Teachers. We're going to give you that report in detail in a subsequent bulletin. But here on the Sunday edition, we'll still continue with a political discussion. And Dismas, before that interruption, you are explaining something. You know, is Raila, by calling for an interim government, you know, getting himself into any sort of illegality?
There's no illegality, because when he calls for an interim government, then the ideas will need to be crystallized into a piece of legislation to go through the National Assembly or Senate and become law. And this is not the first time you're having this idea of interim government taking place in Africa. Like, for instance, in 2008 in South Africa, when there was a crisis between Mbeki and Zuma, the deputy president, Motlanthe, his name is a bit complicated, but he came in as an acting president, or as a caretaker president, so that to have Zuma elected as a president of that nation. And the ideal situation in Kenya would be, because you have Mr. Raila Odinga with his own views about the way you're supposed to run an election in Kenya, and President Kenyatta, so an interim president would not have any of those two at the top.
Yes.
It would review our constitution in a manner that maybe the Speaker of the National Assembly or the Chief Justice or another person comes in, but with a specific mandate of preparing the country for a free,
but you
fair
agree
and
with
credible
Kavemba
election.
that is not something that is taken care of within the Constitution?
Yeah, right now within the legal framework, we don't have it.
Let me allow Hezbollah to get into this discussion. Once again, you're eating into his time. We only have 5 minutes.
Yes,
before
then
the
you'll allow me
second
to respond to something.
Into my
that,
You'll respond to
so
that
we don't
shortly. Let
mislead the
Hezbollah
audience.
deliver his point first.
Well, I think the idea of an interim government is understood by everyone, that it's a government that is having a specific mandate to sort out issues, and to the extent that there is need to sort out issues, you can actually rise beyond the Constitution. And it has happened in Kenya before. I think the national coalition government was formed out of such a crisis that brought together, you know, different political players, and they came up with a piece of legislation that entrenched it in our constitution. In Liberia, I think in 2002, we had the same thing. There was a crisis in the entire West African region, Liberia and Sierra Leone, and Taylor had to go. They formed, and they had an interim government. Their vice president then, Moses Zebla, took power for a few months. Then there was an interim government. And you can talk about the success of Liberia since 2005, after they had since instituted the framework and they've had successive elections. And it is sad that we want to politicize this thing, yet what I can see from some of these political leaders is not the idea of the interim government being bad. It is the fear of losing their privileged position. And I think that is a sad thing, because individuals are looking at their privileged position at the expense of the greater good of this country. If I understand the whole issue correctly, the fear among many political leaders is that if you're going to have an interim government, and the person who heads that government happens to be President Uhuru Kenyatta, he's not going to vie. Now, if you're going to have somebody else,
so it has to be a neutral party,
yeah, it has to be a neutral person. Yes, yes.
And if
yes.
Kavemba, can you react to?
No, let me just finish. And if you're going to have somebody else, I think there is that